This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by my intuitive eating online course. If you're ready to leave diet culture behind and reclaim the life it stole from you, learn more and sign up at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor, offering online courses and programs to help people all over the world make peace with food. Join me here every week as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food and their bodies.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beef, and now I'm ready for the world. Try and sink my teeth in, stacking it.
Hey there, welcome to episode 163 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with TV writer and She's All Fat podcast co-host April K. Quioh. We talk about how intersectional feminism and sociology helped her to finally let go of dieting and embrace her body size, why we need to challenge fatphobia and fight for it to be considered a valid form of discrimination, why it's important to unlearn the diet culture rules we've internalized around food in our bodies, the historical roots of diet culture, and so much more. It's a great episode. I can't wait to share it with you in just a moment. But first, I'll answer this week's listener question, which is from a listener named Mary, who writes, "Dear Christy, thank you for all the work you do with the podcast. I've been working in therapy for several years, but hearing your podcast conversations day in and day out has taken my recovery to a new level. My question is this. My eating disorder has consisted primarily of binging, a brief period when restricting was my chief symptom, moderately compulsive exercise, ongoing restrictive thinking, and lots of rules about the right and wrong foods to eat. I no longer binge on a regular basis, but I have lots of restrictive thoughts about what and when and how I quote-unquote should eat, and pretty much daily I still eat to avoid uncomfortable feelings like anger, stress, frustration, boredom, and anxiety. I've read Intuitive Eating twice, and I have started working through the Intuitive Eating workbook, but when I try to put the principles into practice, I think and feel like I'm just indulging my binging and overeating behavior. For someone who's not in an extremely restrictive or malnourished place, e.g. where the advice would be to start with a meal plan, when do you think they are ready to begin intuitive eating? I do struggle with believing that I don't deserve to recover because I don't fit the quote-unquote typical eating disorder profile. I wonder if I'm not ready for intuitive eating or if I'm still just learning the ropes of it. Thanks very much." So thanks, Mary, for that question. It's a really great one. And before I answer, just my standard disclaimer that these answers are for informational and educational purposes only and aren't a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice. So first of all, I want to say that's awesome that you're working to put the intuitive eating principles into practice, and pretty much everyone struggles with the implementation part of intuitive eating, which is why I created a whole course about it and why I coach people on it and why I have tons of colleagues who are also intuitive eating coaches. You know, it's a thing for a reason. It's really hard to relearn intuitive eating after being stuck in diet culture. So give yourself lots of compassion and just know that this is a process for everyone, that it's, you're not alone in struggling. From what you say, it sounds like you'd probably really benefit from the support of an intuitive eating coach, particularly an intuitive eating trained therapist. I don't know if the therapist you're working with is trained in this stuff or is working on these issues with you, or general eating disorder recovery, or whether it's sort of more of a general therapist. But I think having someone who gets intuitive eating to just help reassure you that you're on the right track and help you through the emotional ups and downs of giving up dieting would be really helpful. So either an intuitive eating therapist or maybe an intuitive eating dietitian or, nutrition coach who could be with you to talk about the food stuff and help reassure you on the food front while you're also working with your regular therapist on the deeper recovery issues. It sounds like you're really just learning the ropes of intuitive eating from what you say, but that can still be really challenging and requires support. So a great resource for finding someone would be the website intuitiveeating.org, and you can go to the Certified Counselors tab in the navigation at the top of the page to find someone there. And in terms of feeling like intuitive eating is indulging your binging or overeating behavior, like you say, this idea is very much coming from diet culture. It's part of the diet mentality. And diet culture is also at the root of the feelings of binging and overeating. That is to say, diet culture tells us we quote unquote should restrict and quote unquote shouldn't eat certain foods. And it sounds like you've very much bought into that rhetoric, and it's showing up in your daily life in the forms of all the restrictive thinking and restrictive behavior that you still have around food. But restriction is exactly the thing that causes binging and causes feelings of overeating, because when you restrict, you create physical deprivation in the sense of not eating enough food. And that can be at a subtler level than the sort of severe malnutrition you might be thinking of. Undereating is still undereating, even if it doesn't show up in sort of the overt ways that diet culture makes us think an eating disorder should look, and more on that in a second. So there's physical deprivation that you're experiencing. And there is psychological deprivation in the sense of not enough variety or freedom in your food choices, not having access to the foods that you really want. And deprivation in both the physical and psychological sense generally causes us eventually to binge or eat a lot of food at one sitting at our next opportunity, that concept of overeating, sometimes to the point of discomfort, because human beings really aren't designed to sustain restriction and deprivation long term, and eventually something has to give. So if you go a long time while being deprived, the pendulum is going to swing back and you're going to end up really eating a lot at one sitting because you were deprived. Your body needs it. That's a natural response to restriction. And so just because you're not severely malnourished doesn't mean you're not deprived, and you absolutely deserve to recover. Everyone deserves to recover, of every body size who struggles in their relationship with food and movement, every body size, every skin color, every gender identity, every neurological makeup, people with autism, people with other sort of neurological issues, like everybody deserves to recover. So you are not off the hook. You deserve to recover too. And in fact, the idea that only severely malnourished and emaciated people, quote unquote, deserve to recover is very much a product of diet culture too. So diet culture perpetuates this false narrative that eating disorders only look one way, that emaciated white woman usually. And it does this, it perpetuates this narrative to normalize the disordered eating that it prescribes to everyone, because diet culture prescribes disordered eating to everyone. And by making you feel like you couldn't possibly be, quote unquote, sick enough to have an eating disorder and deserve help, by making you think that you don't fit the picture of an eating disorder, diet culture keeps you thinking that you're the one that has the problem because you don't have an eating disorder, and yet you can't control yourself with food and you can't follow diet culture's rules, and therefore you're just not a good enough dieter or whatever, right? Instead of recognizing that the problem is actually diet culture itself and that its rules are inherently disordered for everyone. What diet culture prescribes for everyone is disordered eating. So if you're trying to follow diet culture's rules and you're not able to do it, that's because people aren't designed to do it and because those rules are disordered. In terms of feeling like you eat to avoid uncomfortable feelings, I will say that actually research shows that people don't generally eat to soothe or escape difficult emotions unless they're dieting and restricting their eating, or they have some sort of restriction on their eating. So it might be food insecurity, it might be trauma, like there might be other things going on to create restriction. It's not just dieting, but the emotional eating sort of behavior to soothe and sort of escape from difficult feelings, specifically like sadness or anger, anxiety, or things like that, eating in response to those emotions really doesn't happen unless there is underlying deprivation. In general, when people are eating emotionally, when they see themselves as emotional eaters, it's usually because they're dieting or they're restricting or they're deprived of food in some way. And in fact, what our culture calls emotional eating usually diminishes or disappears when people allow themselves full unconditional permission to eat and recover from the trauma of restrictive eating. And that can take years, that can take a long time. And, for people who've been stuck in a restrictive place with eating for a long time, or who have significant trauma in their history with food, like they were deprived of food, they were food insecure at a young age, they didn't have control over food being available to them, they had a parent who was really disordered about food and didn't allow them food, things like that, where it's long-standing trauma. It can take a long time to recover, and it can take a long time for your body to start trusting again that it has access to food, that it's not going to be deprived again. And so that emotional eating behavior might persist for a while as you're in that phase of recovery and sort of getting to the truest, deepest sense of, okay, I have access to food. I'm all right. I'm not going to be deprived again, and fully trusting that. So that's not to say like emotional eating doesn't exist for other reasons, but it is to say that it is very much a product of restrictive eating and deprivation in some way, shape, or form. And when people have that full unconditional permission to eat, emotional eating diminishes or disappears. And when it diminishes, it usually is to the level where, it's nothing like it was before, but maybe people are still reaching for food to cope in certain situations. And that's totally okay, because it is very much a part of intuitive eating to sometimes comfort ourselves with food, but also it might speak to the need for other coping skills, and you can work to develop them at that point. But you aren't going to know if it's a matter of needing other coping skills if you're still actively deprived of food, because in that state, everyone is going to be driven to eat emotionally, to eat for comfort, to eat to soothe those distraught feelings, many of which actually come from the deprivation itself. So deprivation itself can cause anxiety, can cause depression, can cause people to feel really out of control in their life because they're being deprived of a basic human need, which is enough food, food security, the certainty that food is going to be there when you need it. Diet culture really shakes that security. So do other forms of food insecurity like poverty and stuff like that. But if you're shaken in your foundation of feeling like you can trust your access to food, you're going to be much more likely to turn to food for comfort and eat to avoid uncomfortable feelings. And so really that piece is not going to diminish or go away until you're able to give up the restriction and the deprivation. So I talk about this more because that's like a whole podcast unto itself, this idea of emotional eating and deprivation, the connection between them. I talk about this with Judith Matz in episode 151 of the podcast, so I definitely encourage you to go check that out. And I also talk about it with Isabel Fox and Duke in episode 74, so listen to that as well for some more perspective on emotional eating. So to sum up, it sounds like you're still very much struggling with that first principle of intuitive eating, which is rejecting the diet mentality, and being able to really do that and to fully reject the diet mentality in all these subtle ways that it's hanging on for you is going to be the key to being able to make it work for you long term. And I think you might need some support in that just to reassure you that this is okay, this is a normal part of the recovery process, and to help you continue to break down those diet mentality thoughts, those internalized beliefs from diet culture, telling you that you need to avoid certain foods, telling you that you should be restricting. And getting to the root of those and breaking those down is really going to be the key to the full expression of intuitive eating, being able to fully engage and implement intuitive eating in your own life. So I hope that helps. If you want some support from me, you can check out my intuitive eating online course, which is at christyharrison.com/course. That's a great resource for help with implementation of intuitive eating. And I created it for this very reason, that it is so hard for people to give up the diet mentality and fully implement intuitive eating in their lives. So you can check that out. It's more of a self-study course, but it also has support in the form of a monthly Q&A podcast with me where you get to ask your questions and have me answer them each month. And there's an online Facebook group with other people who are going through this journey and are really supportive of one another and just help normalize and sort of defuse all of the things you might be going through as you're trying to implement intuitive eating. So I definitely recommend Mary, who asked the question, checking that out as an option. And then also checking out the Intuitive Eating Counselors Directory if you want some in-person support or some, one-on-one support, just to help reassure you that everything you're going through is normal and that you're going to be okay, and help root out those eating disorder beliefs, those diet culture beliefs that are holding you back from intuitive eating right now. So thanks again for asking that question. And if anyone else listening wants to submit your own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, go to christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions where you can submit your question. And again, if you want hundreds more answers from me to help you make peace with food in your body, you can come join my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. If you're ready to become an intuitive eater and leave diet culture behind once and for all and really put intuitive eating into practice in your life, you can learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. We're brought to you today by Casper, which is my favorite mattress brand. And y'all know that I love my sleep. I think sleep is such an important part of self-care and so often overlooked in our diet-obsessed culture, but it's really an essential piece of self-care and actually a lot more important in many cases than what you eat. And so the Casper is really a great tool for self-care. They have 3 mattress models, the original Casper, the Wave, and the Essential, and they're really perfectly designed to soothe and cradle your body's natural shape for a good night's sleep. Not to mention they have a breathable design that helps you sleep cool and regulates your body temperature throughout the night so you don't wake up in a puddle of sweat like with some mattresses. And the Casper is delivered right to your door in a surprisingly manageable box with free shipping and free returns in the US and Canada. But the best part is that you can be sure of your purchase with Casper's 100-night risk-free Sleep On It trial. After all, you spend a third of your life sleeping, and it is such an important element of self-care, so you really should be comfortable. I've had my Casper for going on 3 years now, and it's been so great for my back, because with my previous mattresses, I used to wake up really stiff and sore, but the Casper gives me a good night's sleep with no pain every time. You can get $50 towards select mattresses by visiting casper.com/foodpsych, that's FOODPSYCH, all one word, and using the code FOODPsych at checkout. That's casper.com/foodpsych and use offer code FOODPsych for $50 off your mattress purchase. Terms and conditions apply. We're also brought to you today by Simple Contacts. There are a million things demanding your time, and contact lenses should not be one of them. Simple Contacts lets you renew your prescription and reorder your contacts from anywhere in minutes. Here's how it works. You take a quick self-guided vision test from your phone or computer. It'll be reviewed from a licensed doctor in 24 hours, and then you'll receive a renewed prescription and you can reorder your contacts in minutes. It's that simple, and the prices are unbeatable with free standard shipping. The vision test is only $20 too, compared to an appointment, which without insurance could cost up to $200. And even with a lot of insurance policies, your copay is probably still going to be more than $20. Though this isn't a replacement for your periodic full eye health exam, so you still need to get that with, they dilate your eyes in the office and all that good stuff. But this is great for getting your contact prescription renewed. And I gotta say, I'm so busy these days that I don't have time to spend in doctor's waiting rooms because they always take forever. And with Simple Contacts, I literally got my contact prescription filled in 5 minutes without even leaving the house. Best of all, FoodPsych listeners get $20 off their first Simple Contacts order. Just go to simplecontacts.com/psych20, that's PSYCH20, or enter the code psych20 at checkout. Again, that's simplecontacts.com/psych20 and enter the code psych20 at checkout for $20 off your purchase. We're also brought to you today by Tomboy X. I love this brand because they're size and gender inclusive and because they make really freaking soft, comfortable underwear. It's time to stop wearing underwear that doesn't make you feel confident and good about yourself and get some underwear that's made to fit you and how you see yourself, which is Tomboy X. Tomboy X has everything from bikinis, briefs, boy shorts, and trunks, which, by the way, are really awesome for eliminating summer thigh chafing, just a little pro tip there, to soft bras and racerback bras. And they're all in everyday basic colors and fun seasonal prints, like my favorite of the moment, which is skull print. It's really cute. And regardless of where you fall on the size or gender spectrum, Tomboy X offers amazing underwear that any body can feel comfortable in. Go to tomboyx.com/foodpsych, that's FOODPSYCH, all one word, and check out their special bundles and pack pricing. FoodPsych listeners will get an extra 15% off with the code FoodPsych, that's FOODPSYCH. Again, just use the code FoodPsych for an extra $15 off at tomboyx.com/foodpsych. Ditch whatever you're wearing for a pair of Tomboy X underwear. Go to tomboyx.com/foodpsych. And now, without any further ado, let's go talk to April Quioh. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
My relationship with food. What a doozy. Well, I grew up in a matriarchal household. Like I was raised with my single mom, my 2 older sisters, and my grandma. And so it was just like all ladies. And they are all immigrants, except for me. I was the first person to be born in America, in Minnesota, actually. And the rest of them were born in Liberia and then became immigrants. So it was it's like a clash of cultures types of thing. Like the Liberian ideal standard of beauty is different than the American one. Like a more curvy figure is kind of the norm, if you will, back there. Whereas in America, at least growing up in like the 90s and early thousands, I felt very much like I should, look like Nicole Richie or whatever. So it was like being curvy or chubby or whatever was accepted, but like to a certain degree. And I was always like fat growing up, like not curvy, but like fat. So we always were on diets together. Like I think it was just kind of this household where it was totally normalized to be like, we're all going on Atkins this week. We're all going on Weight Watchers this week. And it was just like, it's almost like a bonding thing, like what we did together. And then I didn't realize until growing up that it was like, oh, we were all just like participating in diet culture, like as a family, basically. Which, I mean, yeah, it was just kind of something that was super accepted in my family. So it was like, in Liberian culture, food is super important. It's like how people bond, how people grieve, just like in a lot of cultures. But it was also like vanity is very important. And so it's like we made all this delicious food, but like don't eat too much of it. Otherwise, my grandma will pull you aside and be like, you're fat. Like she was just she's a very upfront lady like that. And that's totally like the culture is just different ladies pulling you aside and being like, hey, you're fat. Like if you ever want to get married, maybe not. So that's kind of how I grew up. I was always like naturally, pretty a chubby kid and was always, I remember first going on a diet when I was maybe 6, like very young. Yeah, and that went on until I got to college and I was like, oh, I'm done. I'm over it. So that was it growing up.
What did dieting do to your relationship with food and your body? Did you have feelings about it, or was it sort of like, this is just how it is?
I mean, I had a lot of feelings about it. Sophie and I on our podcast, She's All Fat, talk about a lot like growing up dieting nonstop makes it impossible to know once you break out of that, like what you want. Like today, the thing I still struggle with is like, am I hungry? Am I just eating? Like, it's when you diet, you read a book and it tells you like, okay, you eat this much food to do this. And so to break out of it, it's hard to tell like, am I hungry? What do I really want? What does my body want from me? Like to be nourished. It's like that relationship between your body and you is broken because it's like I ignored what it needed or wanted for so many years. So I think that is the biggest thing that's been damaging. Like the whole concept of intuitive eating is like, wow, sounds so great. I'm not there yet. Like I still am not clear on how to do it because like dieting is the exact opposite or breaking free of that. Like it's going to take a really long time. And so I think that to me has been the most clear, direct result of growing up the way I did. But yeah, I mean, I was tortured by my body growing up. It was like everybody in my family is plus size and I am also plus size. And clearly my body is like naturally made to be plus size. Like everyone in my family is, but I'm constantly fighting against it. And it just felt fruitless. And it just felt like this project that it honestly felt like a waste of my time. Like I was a real studious kid and I'm like, man, I wish I could be at the library. And instead my mom's like forcing me to join a basketball team or whatever. And like, I know that she's just trying her best. And like, and I also was very lazy. So she's like, please just get off the couch. I'm like, no, but it just felt, it was just this kind of like tortured relationship where I'm just like, I wish this wasn't I wish I didn't have to spend so much of my energy thinking about this. And it didn't even work. I mean, diets don't work. We all know it never worked.
Never worked.
So yeah, that it's just an ongoing cycle.
Yeah, that sounds so painful. And I think that's really true of anyone who's been robbed of their intuitive relationship with food at such a young age. Like it's so hard to get back to that when you've just instilled you've had instilled in you these diet rules that are like, this is how much food you eat. This is a portion size. This is a bad food. This is a good food. Like it's very hard to unlearn all that stuff and know like what is a portion size that I actually want? Like how much am I hungry for?
Yeah.
What foods am I naturally drawn towards and what foods do I actually genuinely not like, not because I was told that they were bad, but just because that's not my preference. Like it's hard to connect with that again.
Absolutely. It's the hardest thing. It's like, do I like broccoli or was that just the vegetable I was told to eat? So now as an adult, I'm like, I guess I'll experiment with zucchini or whatever. So it just feels like arrested development in that sense. Like I'm so jealous of people who didn't grow up trying to constantly diet and ignore that part of themselves because they just know what to eat and they know when they're hungry and it's not this complicated thing because it shouldn't be. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. It's like, I don't know when I'm hungry. That is a ridiculous concept, but it's very much true because it's just a side effect of growing up in diet culture.
Totally. And like your body gets traumatized, like literally it's a trauma to be restricted of food. And when we go through traumas like that, the natural instinct of the body is to just push you to eat. I think a lot of people that I talk to, and I went through this in my own recovery from dieting too, would be like, but I'm not hungry. Why do I keep eating? Yeah. And I feel like there's sort of like a diet culture thing in that where it's like we demonize eating when you're quote unquote not hungry and sort of, diet culture keeps us from recognizing the subtle levels of hunger too. It makes it out to be you have to be either all or nothing, hungry and allowed to eat or quote unquote not hungry and not allowed to eat. But also it's the thing of like eating past fullness or eating when you're not hungry, I think is so natural when you've been deprived of food and your body wants to just make sure that's not going to happen again and control for the next famine.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so complicated. So now it's like I'm working on it. I make conscious decisions to really pay attention, but like it's an honest to God struggle just because it's like not how my brain has been wired.
Yeah. So I'm curious how that all unfolded then, because it sounds like you had an inkling of diet culture being a waste of time when you were in high school or, when you're younger, which is
Yeah.
cool. That's like a seed was planted already, it sounds like. But how did it kind of get from there to a place of deciding to stop dieting?
I think what happened was, yeah, it was like all through like young childhood until high school. I was like, I know that this isn't working, but I'm told by like society and also everyone around me that I should be desperately trying to be thin. And then once I got to college, honestly, it was just like, I'm genuinely too busy to be like trying to diet. I'm taking all these classes. I'm like going to this school where it's super challenging. I'm trying to figure out my career. And it just became less and less of a focus until one day I woke up and I was like, oh, you haven't been stressed out about your diet. Like you've been too busy to actually worry about being thin. And so it was this kind of freedom. I mean, it was a double-sided coin where it was like, okay, now I have to learn about nutrition because I haven't been thinking about nutrition. I've just been thinking about dieting. So now I'm less worried about dieting, but I also have no idea how to feed myself. And so it turned more into like not so much dieting, but also just trying to learn what was best for my body. So that happened in college. It was the side effect of not having time and also like learning more about feminism, that's the place where I first got to like study body positivity in a scholarly sense. Like the concept had never come up. I'd never heard the words. It's just, like I said, that inkling and that feeling of like, can't believe I'm walking into another meeting, can't believe I'm buying another diet for teens book or whatever. Like, but I had never been able to sit down and actually study it and actually on the feminist perspective study that like, this is total patriarchal BS. The idea that I should be spending my time trying to force my fat body to not be fat instead of, read a book, which is what I prefer to be doing at all times. So that was the time. And that is like such a privilege. Like the idea that I got to spend 4 years just thinking and learning and spending time on my art and expanding my own mind and perspective is such an incredible privilege that I'm like, I fully understand that I would not be at the place I am today if I had not had those 4 years of just purely expanding my horizon. So I'm so, so grateful that I got to like go to college, got to be in a new environment, make my own choices. And that's when I was like, okay, I want to do this. I want to do this differently. Yeah, that's kind of how it happened.
That's awesome. Was it in a class that you discovered this? Like, were you taking like feminist theory or stuff like that?
Yeah, I took a lot of like feminist theory classes, and then I was a television and a sociology double major. So a sociology classes at Northwestern, a lot of times you get to like pick what your final paper would be. So I just naturally started gravitating towards like feminism and then like intersectional feminism and then like body positive feminism. So from those assignments, I got to kind of find my own sources. And that's when I just like the can of worms opened and I realized like, oh, there are other people. First of all, there's other people thinking this and other people being active about dismantling it, which I thought was so cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, what a lucky thing, that you stumbled into it because it really doesn't happen all the time. People, I mean, now with the internet, I think it's much more accessible. And yet still, if you're searching for weight loss stuff, like the ads that Google is going to serve you and the things that are going to come up higher in your searches are probably not going to be body positivity, not going to be things that are going to actually lead you out of diet culture. So it's still kind of easy to stay stuck in that bubble.
Absolutely. Yeah, Soph and I talk about all the time, in addition to me having like scholarly time to think about this, it was also like being on Instagram and following other plus size people on Instagram who didn't seem miserable in their own bodies, who were number one, finding ways to dress their bodies in ways that suited them, which was always so hard for me, like finding cute stuff and also just like listening to their own tales and perspectives about how they broke through. That was so, so helpful. Like, I mean, there are two sides to social media, but I do wish that I had Instagram in like junior high school. I think I would have been in a different place had I known there were like other people who thought the way that I thought.
I know, totally. It's such a double-edged sword. I think about having kids, like my husband and I are thinking about trying in the next couple of years. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how to deal with kids and social media. It seems like such a can of worms and so fraught. Yeah. But I think if you can guide them towards like the good resources out there, and if people discover those resources, it's so helpful. And it really does create this sort of immersive environment of a different way of thinking than the mainstream view, which is very much still fat phobic and focused on quote unquote body positivity that expands the window of what's acceptable the tiniest bit.
Exactly. Ugh, I do not. I'm not jealous of like modern day children getting bullied in Instagram comments and stuff, but I also am just like, man, I wish. Like if I had been able to find Gabby Fresh when I was like 10, that would have been a game changer for sure.
Totally. It wouldn't have felt as different and ashamed of being the size that you were.
Totally.
Did you experience like bullying or shaming from peers, or was it a lot of internal stuff mostly?
I Here's the truth. Okay, so when I was in kindergarten, I remember there being a brief phase of like people calling me chubby or fat or whatever. But the thing is, I just became like super aggressive to combat that. So I think honestly, people were scared of me the rest of my like high school experience. So honestly, I did not get much bullying after that. Like I made it clear that it's just like, yeah, I am chubby and I'll also destroy you. So like to be honest, everyone was afraid of me. So I think it was internal and also just like, yeah, familial. I mean, it was constant. And for my mother, it's like I think she really thought that what was best for me was to be smaller. Like I think she worried about my emotional eating, which was very true. Like I grew up with a lot of trauma as far as like my parents' relationship around that. And so I definitely was an emotional eater. And so I think like her way of breaking through that, because she wasn't able to identify that it was an emotional thing, was just like, oh, if I push her to be smaller, then maybe that aspect will go away. Like I remember one time when I was 12, I walked in on my mom reading a book called Carbohydrate Addicted Kids. And I was like,
Oh,
Mom, what are you doing? And she was like, I'm
oh,
trying to figure out what's wrong with you. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like,
wow.
this is going into the vault that will be open in therapy 10 years from now. I cannot believe you. Like,
Seriously.
cannot, ridiculous. But so I think she ultimately was just trying to do her best. So I don't fault her too much, but it was just, yeah, I don't remember the question now.
No, I think that's, I mean, yeah, because I was saying like, was it internal or was it kind of external? And it sounds like, yeah, the familial thing is sort of at the crossroads of those. It's like a little bit internal because you internalize the voices of your family and then also coming from a source that's very close to you. But I mean, yeah, parents are just doing the best they can. And I think living in this fat phobic society that we live in the US and in Western culture in general. And then also it sounds like there's a little bit of that coming from Liberia as well. And that there's sort of body standards, even if they're slightly larger than the body standards we have here. But
Yeah.
there's so much pressure on people, and parents are just people. They're human beings doing their best within the context that they were raised and the culture that they live in and what they think is right. So yeah, it's kind of only natural that parents fall into that. And I think, I get questions from parents who listen a lot to the podcast who are like, oh shit, like I just realized that I've been really damaging my kids and this behavior that I've been exhibiting towards them, I see now in them, and they're, doing disordered things with food and stuff. And it's like, it's great that you're taking responsibility for that, but also have compassion for yourself and have empathy
Yeah.
for your own struggles, because we all go through this and we all are victims to diet culture. It's not your fault.
Absolutely. And especially growing up with my grandma in the house as well, I'm like, oh, I know that this has been passed down for generations because like my grandma talks to my mom about her body the same way that my mom talks to me about my body. So I'm like, you were screwed from the jump. Because I'm sure my great grandma talked to her like it's just been passed down generation to generation. So it was clearly not even conscious. It was just like just doing exactly what was done to her and she thought was best for me.
Yeah, and I think that unconscious passing on is exactly how diet culture gets disseminated. It's what perpetuates these beliefs to the point where now, like I'm writing a book and I've been doing some research on the history of diet culture for a chapter that everybody who's listening has heard me talk about a million times. But when I look into it, I'm just so struck by the fact that it was not that long ago that it all began. It was like 150 years ago in Western culture is really when this primacy on thin bodies started to happen, and it was very much based on racist ideas about bodies that were au courant at the time and are now just obviously so backwards, but that still persist, and diet culture still persists because it's so disconnected now from that source, and it's just been passed on and perpetuated throughout the generations that 150 years later it just feels like it's how it's always been. And yet it had a very distinct point in history when it began. And we've forgotten about that because it's just a generational trauma now.
Totally.
It's so frustrating. And so, curious how when you discovered body positivity in college, did that change how you related to food in your body right away? Was that sort of a point where you were like committed to never dieting again? Or did you kind of go back and forth for a while?
I mean, I think I went back and forth for a really small amount of time, but definitely there was that period because it's just, I mean, it's totally ingrained. Like I cannot remember a time before that I hadn't been on a diet. So it felt so unnatural to not be like, oh, here's my book telling me how many cups of rice or whatever. Like it felt so unnatural to not have that. But yeah, immediately I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like I have to try to make a different choice. So yeah, from that point on, after that, like maybe, I don't know, 2 months or so of me like going back and forth, I know I have not gone back on like a diet. Like as far as having days where I'm not totally body positive, of course, constantly, like all the time, I'm a human being, you know. But that was a day where I'm like, no, I'm done. I've been on a diet since I'm 5 years old. Like I'm done.
Yeah, you'd really tried it and seen that it did not work by that point.
Yeah, I tried and true. Like,
Yep.
tried my best. I promise.
Yeah, all set on that. You checked that box.
Exactly.
And then, so now you're a comedy writer, and I'm so curious to hear about that journey. Like, when did you know you wanted to go into that field?
Oh my gosh, I've known that I wanted to do television and film, like whatever specificity within that for a really long time, like maybe since I was like 6 or 7 years old. I think it was born out of like I was alone a lot growing up. My mom had 3 jobs, and so it was a lot of just like me home watching television, and I ended up being really inspired by just like storytelling, like that format of storytelling. And I grew up around storytellers, like Liberian people are really known for their abilities to tell like sort of riveting stories. So I was both hearing lots of like riveting stories in my home and then watching amazing television all the time. And from then on, I was like, I'm doing this. Like it started with, I would write like little plays for my Barbies as a child, and then I would like act them out, like very nerdy, but very into it. And then when I got to junior high school, my school would let me like check out camera equipment. And so I started making like horrible documentaries that like are now all unlisted on my YouTube page. But I started making documentaries and like started trying to get into like what would a script even look like and how to write my own. I had a lot of amazing teachers in my high school who really believed in me and would like bring me books totally outside of class and be like, read this, get into this, to try to understand like the format and science of how you even go about that. And so yeah, from that age on, it was always, that was exactly where I was headed. I always knew I wanted to do that. And so it was just a matter of where. So then, yeah, I went to college for television, did that for 4 years, did internships like every summer at different television stations during that time. And then right after graduation, well, went home for 6 months in Minnesota and like laid on the floor. I was just like so burnt out. I did nothing for 6 months and then got my first job and moved to LA 6 months after graduation. And I've lived here ever since. This is my third year in LA now.
Wow, that's amazing. I feel like I have talked to so many people in the entertainment industry who have struggled so much to like make it happen, and it's just a slog, and writing spec scripts and all this crap. So like it's very cool that you sort of plugged in, and it sounds like knowing what you wanted to do from such a young age maybe helped you really hone in on your skills.
It totally did. I mean, I think that was my biggest, like the biggest benefit to me was knowing what I wanted to do and being specific about my steps, because a lot of the people I went to school with were kind of born into the industry. Like I went to school with the daughters and sons of every like showrunner in Hollywood. And so they all were kind of given a job. And I knew like, hey, my parents are immigrants. My mom's a nurse in Minnesota. Like I don't have connections, but like, let me try to go to a school where I can be able to start getting those connections and start making those relationships. So my first job came from, a guy I had as a professor in college, this like really zany television professor who you would like pitch a fake show basically. And then if he didn't like it, he would like boo you in front of the whole class. He's like this amazing guy. So I took his class. He's like 90 years old. I'm like, he's never going to remember me, whatever. Then 6 months after college, I get a call from his son, and his son just got a show on Netflix and he's going to be the showrunner. He's like, hey, my dad was raving about you. Do you want to come out and be my writer's assistant? And I'm like, what? First of all, I can't believe your dad knows who I am. Like, I cannot believe he remembers booing me a year ago. But I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So I moved to LA in 2 weeks. It was like a huge whirlwind. And started my job as a writer's assistant, which basically a writer's assistant is just you're in the writer's room with all of the writers for the television show and the showrunners, who are the people who run the show, obviously. And then you write the scripts. Like sometimes on the show I worked on, which is called Haters Back Off on Netflix, the showrunners would just dictate the script. They'll be like, Miranda says this. And you literally type the script, you format it, you point out if there's like continuity errors, or if you have a suggestion and the showrunners are open to it. Sometimes they'll be open to it, sometimes they won't. But that's the kind of time where you get to both do like all the admin labor for the show, but also you get to kind of show your writing chops in a small way. So that was my first foray into the industry professionally, like outside of my internships. And yeah, that was just a wild ride. Usually, like people have to be assistants for longer before you get a writer's assistant job. So it just kind of like happened to me. It was really exciting, but also really overwhelming because I mean, I'm sure everyone's had the experience of like, it's your first day of work. They tell you to do something. You absolutely do not know how to do it. You say, I'm on it. And then you like go to the bathroom and Google how to do it.
Yep.
Like, no idea what you're talking about, but like we'll figure it out. That was that whole job. Yeah, that was my first gig. I did that for 2 seasons, and then it was tragically canceled. But yeah, but I mean, it's fine. Like we had a wild ride for 2 seasons, and yeah, that was my first job.
That sounds amazing. I mean, what a
Yeah.
cool experience to learn from and to get just sort of immersed in LA and the world there. Like, wow. And I'm curious to know like where body positivity and stuff fit into all that too, because I mean, my God, like TV and comedy, it's like once you've kind of seen the Matrix or whatever, you can't really unsee it. And it's so hard to unsee. I know you and Sophie talk about this a lot on the podcast about like your problematic faves and stuff, like things being, you really like a show or you really like a movie or whatever it is, but it's super fatphobic in some way, or it just has little moments of like diet culture threaded in. And it's just so maddening.
Yeah.
I'm curious how your work in television was informed by your body positivity and how maybe if there's any clash between those values ever.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the more aware of any social problem you become, the more difficult it becomes to like exist in the world. And specifically in the television industry, it's like, I mean, people will write fat phobic jokes into their scripts and it's like, it's so unconscious. Like that's something where people are not even aware that like you should not talk about a human being's body like that. So especially being a lower level person when I first started out, it's tricky because like a showrunner might write something really horrible into a script and you could be the one to say something. And if you do, you have made a difference, but also you might get the reputation of being difficult. And the trickiest thing in the television industry, I mean, that we've all learned from the Me Too movement is like, it's not like a normal industry where you like apply and are interviewed and it's a normal process. No, it's like, it's all word of mouth. It's all just like who likes you. And so if you like work with a showrunner who is not open to being called out for their own fat phobia, the next time you need a job, they might not recommend you. They might say, so-and-so is difficult. So-and-so is like killjoy. So-and-so like won't let us enjoy comedy because they're too political. So, I mean, it's burdensome. It can be burdensome depending on who you work with to be the person constantly saying like, oh, I mean, that's kind of low hanging fruit. Like, oh, are we sure we want to make that joke? Like, oh, really? So for me, it was all about finding that balance of there was times where I was like, absolutely. Like if I lose my job over this, I have to say something. And there's times where you have to like, if you want to fight for it, maybe you have to have like a really good alternate so that they cannot, turn down the joke. Like you have to have such a good joke that they have to take yours instead of whatever fat phobic joke they were going to take. But yeah, it's just super difficult. And also weirdly, people really want to hold on to it. Like a lot of people, I mean, you can observe this on even Twitter from like different showrunners getting called out. They just get so defensive. Like people really want to hold on to their fat phobia. They think like no jokes should be off limits and why I have every right to make fun of a fat person. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, you do have every right to say whatever you want. But also when the tweets come in and when the think pieces come in about how you're problematic and you're canceled, like that's your fault. Like in the moment, a lot of people will really like weirdly cling to that. I'm like, I don't know why you're so passionate about calling someone fat on TV, but like, I guess if that's what you care about. But so for me, it was just this, it was first of all, having the confidence to speak up if I ever did observe those things and just figuring out like how best to make it clear how I felt about it without getting a reputation of being like, she's like, negative Nancy, she's Debbie Downer. But thankfully, like all the showrunners I've worked with have been really open to when I brought stuff up like that, whether it's fat phobia or whether it's like racism, like problematic racist jokes I come across all the time. Most people have been pretty open to it. I think people like, number one, want to avoid the hashtag you're canceled on Twitter and also like are genuinely invested in growing in that way. So I've been lucky, but I've heard from other people who have tried to stand up for those types of things and not been as lucky. So it's a tricky industry to be political because a lot of people walk in, they're not thinking about politics, they're not thinking about social issues, they're just thinking about what will get the first laugh. And so that, especially comedy, makes it really, really challenging.
Yeah, and I think there's something about the first laugh, like you said, the low-hanging fruit. It's like you could sort of write something that's easy and not have to challenge yourself too much to come up with a better joke. And it can be tough to be called out. And it's, it can be frustrating to have to go back and redo your work, whatever field you're in, but especially creative work where you're like, I think people are so resistant to killing their darlings a lot of the time. But
yeah,
I think it really makes for better comedy and better creative pursuits all around if people can push themselves past that. And I think a lot of the showrunners wouldn't agree. And, probably a lot of them have a lot of privilege, right? A lot of white male privilege. And that's really still who sort of runs Hollywood. And that's why we've seen all the abuses like we did with Harvey Weinstein and all of that stuff. But I think the idea of the killjoy, like the feminist killjoy or the fat positive killjoy or whatever, is so toxic because it positions you as like someone who can't have fun or who hates fun and wants to kill other people's fun, instead of someone who wants to make fun more accessible and more available to people. Because if you're a fat person or a Black person watching a comedy that has a fatphobic or racist joke, that's not going to be fun for you. Like, that's going to be painful.
No.
And so why not make it fun for everybody?
Absolutely. And it's also this thing of where if you are the only fat person or the only Black person on staff, I've had friends who've had the experience of they work on a show, a fat phobic joke gets across on the show, people know they work on the show, and then you get tweets like, why did you let this slide? Why didn't you say anything? And you kind of carry the whole burden on your shoulders, where it's like they probably fought so hard in that room, and I'm sure the showrunner was like, nope, gotta have this fat joke. And then it looks like they didn't try, and it looks like they betrayed their community, when in reality it's like there's 50 white showrunners who have all the privilege and all the power, and everyone else is just like trying their very best. But from the outside looking in, it looks like, oh, you betrayed your community. And so it's so tough. But for me, it's like, it's really important to me. I mean, number one, I don't think it's funny. Like, I think fat jokes are whack, and like you could do better than that. But I also just it's so important to me for people to watch TV and not be alienated by it. Because I have also had that experience of turning on my favorite show and they make some horrible joke. And it's like, I wanted to have fun, and now I feel so alienated and I feel so alone. And I can't believe I'm a punchline when I'm just supposed to be watching this to laugh and distract myself from Trump setting everything on fire or whatever. So I want to, in the work that I do, avoid that as much as possible. But it's really hard. There's a lot of pushback. And so it's a slow but steady race, I would say, to getting to a place where it's no more tasteless fat jokes. It's going to take a while.
And it sounds like you have to really work within the system, because I could see when you're eventually running your own show or whatever you want to do, you'll be able to call those shots and be able to say to whoever's working for you, nope, we're not going to do that. Bring me a different joke.
Yeah.
But to get to that point, you have to work your way up, and you have to do that by not getting the reputation as so difficult that people don't want to work with you. So it's this delicate dance of having to access that power and that privilege in order to then dismantle the fatphobic jokes or dismantle the oppression in any way.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh, gosh, what a challenge. But I mean, such a cool thing that you're able to have that opportunity, to be part of it. And I'm sure that there are many fatphobic jokes that have not come out on television thanks to you and thanks to probably many other show, writers as well.
Yeah, I try my best. I do.
And what about, you said in your bio that you write about race as well, like race and pop culture and stuff. And I'm curious how that is if you're working for shows where they're sort of more open to that and where there's more of a dialogue around racial issues, or whether you have to really fight for that as well.
Yeah, I definitely, I've worked on shows where there have been no people of color on the cast, and they've gotten in trouble and had to kind of scramble and reassess from that perspective. And I've also worked on shows starring people of color. And so my personal preference is to work on shows that are about people of color, because then you get to use your real experiences to sort of inform those characters. And that to me is just so much more fun versus a show where it's they, quote unquote, pick the best people for the job, and it happened to be an all white cast, and now they're scrambling. To me, that is less fun. But so the most recent show that I worked on is called Joker's Wild. It's Snoop Dogg's game show, which was wild. I had never heard of it before I got the job, and I did not know Snoop Dogg had a game show.
Had no idea either.
Yeah, it's on season 2. People love it, apparently. It's on TBS. Yeah, I had no clue. But that was super fun, because Snoop is both obviously a rapper and a Black man, but also somebody who really cares about racial justice and is really vocal about those sort of things in his real life and in his work. So we get to use that for the show. Like on the show, we have him do different characters. It's like it's a sketch show and also a game show combined, basically. So to me, it's been fun because I've had the opportunity for the showrunners to look to me and say, like, listen, what do you think Snoop would say? What kind of character do you think he would enjoy doing? Like your experience as a Black person is valued here. And that is a super important feeling that I don't get all the time. So like I had a lot of fun. We wrote a character where Snoop pretends to be a white guy and does his like impression of a white guy's voice. It's just like, it's so entertaining. It's so much fun. And it's just been a wild ride trying to like figure out how to use those elements of his personality and bring it into the show in like a funny way. But yeah, I mean, there's also been times where, of course, I've had to like fight against racist jokes. People are just super ignorant, to be honest. But I will say that usually when I'm like, oh, something's racist, people are more likely to be like, oops, sorry, we'll take it out right now. Than if I'm like, something's fatphobic, they're like, whatever, I don't care. But mostly people will be more open to hearing feedback about like what might be perceived as a racist joke, I would say. I just think people are more scared of that.
Right. I know. I feel like that's the thing when people say like fatphobia is sort of the last socially acceptable form of discrimination. It's like, A, not really, because there's still so much racism that goes kind of underground in our society
Yes.
or under, thinly veiled. But the sort of overt racism, I think definitely same with like overt sexism or overt homophobia or whatever is much more frowned upon now than it was however many decades ago. But there's still a lot to be done with that. And there's still just the fact that nobody really wants to hear it or cares that much when, nobody's scared when you say that's a fatphobic joke. They should be. They should be scared, the fact that that people in larger bodies are like 67% of the country or something, or no, more than that even, but that's just women. It's like more than 2/3 of the country is in larger bodies. And yet this like vast majority of people isn't speaking out against it because of diet culture, because of the self-loathing that instills. Nobody's like, hey, fuck you. Like you can't make a joke like that. And, rising up and sort of shaming people who are fat shamers. And I think that needs to happen more.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so pro like shame people who deserve to be shamed. Because I honestly think a lot of people won't learn until they get the like hashtag you're canceled trending on Twitter. And I'm like, that's what it takes for you to reevaluate your like comedic sensibilities and whatever. I think it's super important.
Yeah, I was just involved in kind of a public, not anything to do with fat shaming, but sort of a related thing of a company that's really prominent in the eating disorders field made an app that was like a new app that was sort of a spin-off that was not an eating disorders app, but that had weight management in it.
Ooh.
And everybody in the eating disorder community and the health at every size community was horrified because it's like, what are you doing? This is obviously going to trigger and run counter to everything you say you're about with this other thing that you're doing. And like your whole organization's mission is to help end disordered eating, and this directly contradicts that. And we were able to get them to change it and get them to take out the weight management stuff from the new app by getting it to be a social media thing and having people write scathing things about them on Twitter and Facebook and write in to the company, send a deluge of emails, and they were super responsive. And from what I hear, this company is very responsive to feedback anyway, but I think that there was something about this sort of, not that it was shaming. I mean, some people definitely framed it in a shaming way. I think most, the way that I and my colleagues who were kind of leading the charge on it did it was kind of like, you need to do better. What are you going to do about it kind of thing. But it was effective. It was extremely effective. And I don't think that a few isolated emails necessarily would have been as effective.
Absolutely. It's like the public aspect. Like, I mean, I'm of two minds where I think some people are like, if you do wrong, you're canceled forever. I think no, like if you do wrong, I believe people are capable of change, but I also think most people won't be pushed to change until they're like publicly forced to because people just want to save face, to be honest. But I think like once people are called out and they respond positively, like that's the best outcome. I want to see people improve. I don't want to see them just like disappear,
Yeah, totally. Because they're already in positions of power if they're in that sort of a public space where people are reacting to them. They've got some measure of power. And so if they can make change and do better from that position, that actually helps everybody and that helps spread the message more.
Totally.
I think this call out culture thing, though, it's an interesting sort of discussion because a lot of people, I think the number one question that I get on the podcast or from the podcast and people who are in my community is, how do I talk to the people in my life or the people I see on social media that I'm maybe not so close with, but I'm like Facebook friends with or something, that are spouting off about the obesity epidemic or, making fatphobic jokes or whatever it is. And how do I like talk to them and how do I set boundaries with them? And I think it's such a complicated thing because it depends on the context. It definitely, like you said about the TV writing thing, it's like you have to kind of pick your battles and you have to know when you're going to be able to make someone pay attention and do something differently. And you have to also know when it's going to just harm you more than it is going to help them or help the cause to act and maybe hold back in certain cases. I think this whole public thing of shaming people who are doing bad things and making fatphobic jokes and stuff is really sort of applicable to the individual situation as well.
Totally. And it's super hard to navigate those conversations because you don't even know, as far as on a personal basis, who would be open to hearing you out. Like my worst fear is that I try to have a conversation with somebody in the Facebook comments who's not open to it. And then I just wasted like 2 hours of my time.
Yes.
I'm like, do not waste your breath on like lost causes. But like, if you know someone who you think perhaps has the ability to be open-minded and to think differently, then absolutely engage in those conversations. But some people are just like dead set on being ignorant forever. And for those people, I'm just like, all right, have at it. I cannot waste my emotional capacity on you. So I think it's important to be kind of like cautious when you're figuring out how to have those conversations.
Yeah. And that's a really great point of like being guarded about your time too. And just knowing I don't want to waste my time. This is my precious time on this planet that diet culture has already stolen quite enough of.
Exactly.
I don't want to spend it now trying to educate people who just refuse to be educated.
Absolutely.
Someone before we spoke today, someone tweeted me on Twitter about, they were like, I was on a Reddit page and I made the mistake of raising the idea of health at every size and fat acceptance. And now they're all after me. And I sent them your podcast and I sent them a link to like something else, health at every size, but that wasn't good enough. And they want science. Like, where can I find the science? And I was like, honestly, I would not recommend hanging out on Reddit because that is a community where like the company clearly doesn't care about fat phobia. There's fat shaming trolls all over the place there and nobody does a thing about it. And that's the kind of discrimination and bigotry that they just let run rampant there. And I would not spend any time there. They were like, I don't know the gender of the person, but they were like, I was in a gaming forum and I like talking about gaming, but then this diet culture stuff just sort of happened to come into play there or whatever.
Yeah.
And Redditors will only respond to science. They don't care about anything else other than science. I'm like, I get it. Like, I get that there are those people who want the science and I get wanting to fight science with science, but also the people who are in that framework, I think don't really understand the whole scope of the problem. They don't understand like the emotional components of weight stigma and what fat phobia does to people. And they don't necessarily care. It's like the concern trolling thing of, well, it's just about your health. I'm just concerned about your health and therefore I'm going to shame you for it.
Yeah.
Shame you into quote unquote taking care of yourself, which is total bullshit.
Which doesn't even make any sense. And it's also like, I mean, it's hard because there are some studies, like we had an episode on Choose All Fat called Choose All Fat Goes to the Doctor. And in the show notes, we did list a bunch of studies that kind of talk about how dieting is not good for you and could have actually more negative side effects than just being fat your whole life. But also it's like, number one, there isn't a lot of research in the field because people don't care about like listening to fat people's actual experience, and it's just kind of wildly accepted that like weight loss equals good or whatever. So like there isn't a ton of science I can point to, but also like if you really cared about truly understanding the issue in a holistic way, like they would go find their own resources. We all have the same access to the same internet. So it's like, to me, it's kind of pointless. Like I will never do a Google search for anyone. I'm like, please do your own Google. And if you refuse to do the Google, that just proves that you don't actually want to know about this and you actually just want to be fat phobic. And like, that's cute for you, but like, I'm not going to waste my time on that. But it's so easy to get stuck in those conversations because you like, it's something you care about and affects you, but not everybody is willing to hear you out and not everybody deserves your time.
Totally. Yeah. I was just talking with someone else on the podcast about the science stuff and sort of arguing back with science. And she was like, honestly, that shouldn't even come into the conversation because yes, there is science to support this. And yes, now we have a lot more evidence of like weight stigma being the problem, like weight stigma being more of an issue, more of a risk factor for your health than weight itself. And that's like some really cool research that if anyone, again, wants to Google it, if you just literally Google weight stigma or Google Scholar it or PubMed search it, like it'll come up. But she was like, it's not really the point because the issue is the fatphobic beliefs and how they affect people's relationship with themselves and their bodies. And I have done some research also for this history of diet culture chapter that I'm working on, showing that the fatphobic ideals about bodies actually predated any health arguments by like a good 50 or so years. You know, there were some health arguments coming on the scene as the fatphobic ideas about bodies were ramping up, but really the sort of idea that fat was bad for your health did not become codified until like the 1920s or something. And the fatphobic ideas about bodies and based on racist ideas about who was more quote unquote evolved really started in like the 1850s. So yeah, it's very much like health follows prejudice, really. That those health arguments are born out of prejudice. They weren't independently determined. It's actually scientists are people too, I'm always saying. So when people are doing the research and they already have fatphobic beliefs, guess what they're going to find?
Exactly. Because that's what they're looking for. I think people really like on a day-to-day level struggle with having their own ideas of truth questioned. It's like finding out that like Santa Claus isn't real. They're like, wait a minute. Being fat doesn't mean you're going to drop dead at 30. That's what I was told. Like people are just not willing to be open to hearing the truth because it doesn't align with what they've always been told. And I mean, like I, on a certain level, do understand that it could be like kind of disorienting to hear that everything you've been told and been threatened with is like not based in reality. But it's also like if you were to just take a step back from that and hear out a fat person and hear that like, you know, last week I had to go to the dentist and they had to take my blood pressure and they're like, oh, wow, it's normal. It's like, yeah, I'm fine. But they just assumed it would be like off the charts because I'm plus size. And it's just like that is something that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And that's not science. That's just bias. But they're not willing to hear that out because it's totally different than what everyone was raised to believe. But I'm just like, if you would take a second and just listen to somebody outside of yourself for like a quick moment, you would know that it's just pure discrimination, like on a 24-hour basis.
Totally. I mean, seriously, that's what it is. And like also people, I think the people who are the most privileged or the people who've like fought the hardest and are in that, you know, slim like 5% or whatever of people who go on diets and somehow keep the weight off. Those folks are so invested in holding on to their privilege or whatever hard-won thin privilege that they've found in their ability to shrink their body and not have to deal with discrimination that I think it's such a counterintuitive thing to then come across ideas of like you can actually be fat and be okay.
Yeah.
Like it challenges that you know everything that they feel that they've worked so hard to achieve.
I mean, I just wish I understand that people want to be quote unquote proud of themselves for weight loss or whatever. But I'm like, if your personal pride is at the expense of so many other people's daily experience, like maybe you should just like reevaluate, like maybe just like something to think about. But that's none of my business. None of my business.
Yeah, no, such a good point. And I think that goes back again to the idea that fatphobia is not considered to be a valid form of discrimination, or it's not considered to be a form of discrimination. It's, you know, seen as just how it is, or it's health. It's just concerned about people's health or whatever, rather than like, no, when you say that someone should lose weight, or you say that you want to lose weight or like be less fat, you're discriminating against people in bodies who are fat because you're saying that like that kind of body is bad and you want to distance yourself from it. And like, what is that if not discrimination?
Exactly.
Ugh, drives me up a wall.
I know. Me too. I'm right there with you.
I know you all talk a lot about that on the podcast on She's All Fat. I'd love to hear, for anyone who hasn't heard it yet, what is the podcast about? How did you come up with the idea? Take us into that.
Sure. Yeah. So She's So Fat podcast, our tried and true tagline is the podcast for body positivity, radical self-love, and chill vibes only. And basically what that means is like we talk about, you know, these social issues through our own specific perspectives, and we try to have fun with it. Like, it's like a lot of this stuff, as you can tell, can be really depressing to talk about, like, oh yeah, I'm just discriminated in multiple ways on a daily basis. Like, that's such a bummer. But like, we try to find a way to have fun with it. We do a lot of like popular culture criticism. So in our last season, we went to see the movie I Feel Pretty, just because it was like that was something that was marketed as body positive and was all over the place. And then saw it, and then just dismantled it on our podcast and had a lot of fun, like truly tearing apart like the different parts of it. But yeah, how it started was last summer. It's been just about a year now. Sophie and I have been friends for a couple years. We like met on the internet, very millennial friendship. And like we're both fat. We always have these conversations about like body positivity in the media and just also in our personal lives and experiences. And we both love podcasts. And it took us like a long time to figure out like, oh, let's just do one together. Like, we talk about body positivity and we talk about the podcast we listen to. So let's just do one. Like, took a while, but we got there. And yeah, started it last summer, and we try to cover a bunch of different topics that either our listeners specifically request or like trends we notice in the public eye, and kind of talk about our different perspectives. My favorite part about the show is that what Sophie and I have in common is our willingness to care about this issue, our care for our community and our like bodies, but we've led totally different lives. So like I said, I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up like very working class, and I grew up a fat Black woman. Sophie grew up like in Phoenix, Arizona. She grew up very wealthy, and we just have had different experiences. So we can look at all these different issues from our different perspectives, and also we can find there's lots of things that we totally agree on, and there's also lots of things that we see very differently because of our own personal identities. And so for me, it's been really fun to kind of walk out those intersectional feminist conversations with this body positive lens. So yeah, we're over at She's All Fat. We're having fun. We're on a summer break right now, but now's a great time to go and listen to our first 2 seasons. And we're excited to come back for season 3 in the fall.
So cool. I love the conversations that you have, because I feel like, you know, when you say it's like these intersectional issues, it totally is. There's totally like you know, you can hear that like your different identities are informing how you view things, and you talk about that, but like it's just fun. I feel like it's a great model for anyone who hears about like intersectionality and feels scared, because I know that there are people out there like that who are like, oh my God, how do I deal with this? How do I speak in a way that's correct or whatever? I think your podcast is a great model of just like how to do it in a way that's super chill and not a thing, you know. It's just acknowledging where you're coming from when you're reading something.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We have a lot of fun. I mean, the hard part is that we're constantly talking about our own emotional trauma on the show. The good part is we're doing it with our really good, like, we're both really good friends, and we try to make it fun.
And it makes, I think, people feel less alone too. You know, I think talking about emotional trauma, I mean, there's definitely the line, and I, as a podcaster, I've been doing this for 5 years now, 5.5 years. So I'm definitely kind of have practiced and made some mistakes in terms of how much of myself I wanted to reveal and how much felt okay to me, you know, because like in the early season, like the first season, I was just like, blah, like all of it, you know?
Exactly.
And then I was like, that didn't actually feel so good. So now that's behind a paywall and people can listen to it if they want. But, you know, I'm much more boundaried in terms of like what I share and feel more comfortable about what I share. But I think just having those conversations and like sharing about what we've all gone through as human beings that's one of the reasons that I decided to start a podcast too, was because podcasts made me feel less alone. And when I heard other people sharing about their emotional traumas and, you know, histories of addiction or food issues or whatever, I was like, oh my God, you too? Wow, I'm not like this pariah over here, just, you know, in my own little world being so messed up, you know?
Exactly. I can't tell you how much it means to me that people will write in all the time and be like, oh, you know, I wish that like I had people in my life that were like you. And like, I totally have had similar experiences and I just feel so seen, because I just totally understand that experience of growing up. I felt like I was the only one who was like constantly fighting against my own body, constantly feeling shame for looking the way that I know I'm supposed to look, you know? So it means a lot to both of us to be able to be that for people. But you're also right. We've definitely had to be like, these are the things we're willing to talk about. These are the things we're not willing to talk about. Like, I want to be there for people without having to like re-traumatize myself on the show. So that is a very like difficult line to figure out. But once you figure it out, like it definitely makes a big difference.
It does. And I feel like it makes, I mean, at least for me, I think it's made me a more confident person and a person who's more comfortable with her own history and trauma and stuff too, because I'm just like, yeah, I can talk about this or not talk about this to whatever extent feels okay, and I get to decide. I get to call the shots. And as someone who grew up in a family where like everything just like it was all, talk about everything and it all hangs out, I didn't get to set my own boundaries like that. And I think that's a big part of like why I had a lot of trauma. And so now being able to reclaim that and being able to say like, you know what, I just told that story about my family history because I chose to, but like I didn't feel compelled to do it, and I feel comfortable with it, and like I get to call the shots about what I share. I think that's helped me a lot as a person.
Absolutely.
Well, people should go check it out. I love your show. I love what you're doing. And we'll put links to all of it in the show notes so people can find you and listen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really hope people check out the show. We have a lot of like similar DNA in both of our podcasts. So I'm super excited to be here. Yeah, come check us out.
Absolutely. So excited to have you. Thank you so much for chatting. It was great.
Thank you for having, now you've had both Sophie and I, the whole She's All Fat family.
Yes.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to April Quioh for joining us on this episode, and thanks to you for listening as always. If you're looking for some help getting started on your own anti-diet journey, grab my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. Head over to christyharrison.com/strategies to get it. That's christyharrison.com/strategies. And then if you've gotten something out of this podcast, please help us reach more people who need to hear about why diet culture needs to die by sharing this episode on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or your favorite podcast platform, and getting your friends and family to subscribe as well. You can go to christyharrison.com/subscribe to see all the different places to do that. And then to get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we discussed, plus a full transcript, head over to christyharrison.com/163. That's christyharrison.com/163. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. A big thanks to our editor and engineer, Mike Lalonde, and to my Food Psych programs team, including our community manager and content development associate, Ashley Saruya, our administrative assistant, Julianne Watasik, and our transcript assistant, Megan Saichi, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show every week. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Meredith Noble, and the music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put